Good evening, everybody. This is another meeting of Studio Think Imagine hosts. I'm Professor Dr. Pınar Dinç Kalaycı, the coordinator of Studio Think Imagine. And we are very happy, as a studio, we are very happy to be hosting Mr. Tszwai So from Spheron Architects, a London-based office. You're welcome, Tszwai.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening. Good evening to everyone.
Good evening. We are going to talk about emotions, and dear Tszwai So will give a good presentation to us about the backstage of Spheron Architects buildings, and also many other things that I'm not going to tell now. Let me leave it as a surprise to the audience.
I've always been fascinated by this highly subjective connection, the connection between human emotions and the built environment. And a lot of this relationship is linked to memory and identity. And I have, just to answer your question, Professor Pina, I've dedicated my, if you like, my career so far to pursuing this line of inquiry. I've, dedicated my time to understanding this relationship. And sometimes I just feel like building a building might not be the most effective way of achieving this. First of all, it usually takes a long time to finish a project. And what am I going to do, in between? I tend to pick up these small projects to interrogate, to investigate, really. And as I mentioned early on, I use different media, words, architecture, films, and drawing. And what I really want to show you next is this derelict building, because this is a very good example to illustrate that relationship, that subjective relationship I talked about. This is a photo of me sketching in front of this building during my second visit. This is a Baroque synagogue built in the 17th century in a town called Slonim in Eastern Europe, in modern-day Belarus. At that time, I was working with a group of volunteers in the UK and the US in an attempt to restore it. This town changed hands multiple times in history, but it had always been a Jewish town because the majority of the inhabitants were Yiddish speakers up until 1941, when the Nazi troops entered the town. In just over a year, the Nazis exterminated the entire Jewish population of 22,000 in a series of massacres. Children were murdered manually by the Nazis, who wanted to save their bullets. And, it's really gruesome. Pregnant women were shot in the belly. And on my return to London, I was granted access to the private archive of a family related to Slonim. And there are many letters and family memoirs and so on. This was what inspired me to create this drawing, to communicate the fact that there comes a time when a building stops being a building and becomes an archive of memories within which we find different narratives and meanings to construct our collective identities, to make us feel whole, as well as to remind us of the occasional ugliness of humanity. And the family is given a name to this drawing. They call it Slonim, 1941. So going back to the film, I've got the idea of creating this film after watching Herbert Wright's lecture in Poland online, and it's still available on YouTube and is really worth checking out. This film is essentially a visual essay inspired by Herbert's ideas, and I've invited him to narrate the film, as you could see early on. And he said in his lecture, as well as in my film, that all architects and urban planners should be trained in cinematography. After all, they create the set for the drama that is our day-to-day lives. And this film was conceived as a response to the Venice Biennale's main theme, which was how will we live together? And for me, it addresses Cedric Price's provocation in the 1960s. He once said, technology is the answer, but what was the question? Now, the film speculates that technology may either be an answer in architecture and urban planning or leading us sleepwalking into an algorithm-driven future. Now, COVID-19 and lockdowns swept the world was an extraordinary experience, one which drove my quest to examine how cities and technology have become fused to the extent that human beings risk becoming overwhelmed by the places and technology they have created. And the film was inspired by this concept of psychogeography, a concept developed by the famous Situationist International movement, popular in the 1960s, which criticized the utilitarian and functionalist approach to urban planning. And the film follows a flâneuse, in French, which means a female wanderer, drifting through the urban landscape of a cosmopolitan city, seemingly tracing childhood memories. And there was a scene at the beginning showing homeschooling during lockdown, a scenario familiar to millions around the world. We had to educate our children at home. And it begins a questioning of how humans risk becoming lost in both their urban landscapes and the intense digitalization of everyday life. Now, throughout the film, a narration by Herbert questions the relationship between urban reality and technology. It was my intention to make the film very ambiguous. It never really did disclose, which bit was reality, which bit was not, and it's up to the viewers to interpret it. And next, I would like to talk a bit about drawing, observation through drawing and drawing as an art form. My guilty pleasure has always been observing quietly how people navigate their lives in a built environment and understanding how they respond emotionally to it. I'm not really interested in arguing which buildings move us, which buildings don't. Instead, I'm interested in finding out why and how we respond to our built environment emotionally. I've learned that each one of us brings her own associations with buildings, with those we use every day or those linked with significant events in our past, and they color our response to our built environment. Now, the key message I really want to relate to you is this one. Spaces could only be given the most meaningful expressions, not by the will of the architect, but the lived experience of the occupants. And I used to try to like this sketch I did back in 2008. I used to try to capture everything as precisely as I could when I drew buildings, but very soon I realized it was a meaningless exercise. I might as well just take a photograph. I then learned to capture the moments more rapidly in order to record my particular emotions associated with my subjects at those particular moments. And like this one, I did as a demonstration to my students when I took them to Malta on a drawing tour. Drawing is also an art form is in its own right, as we see in the works by the great German artist Kathy Kowes and the South African artist William Kendridge. They really elevated drawing to the status of art. And for me, I see drawings as windows into one's own inner world, not just the artist, but also the viewers. The drawings will, what you see is what you have in your mind as a viewer, as well as the artist. And for me, I see drawings as a way to mediate between the sayable and the unsayable. I mean, there's a limit to our language, and what language can't do, I think drawing can definitely fill that gap. So next, I would like to talk about Chernobyl. I think we all know what happened to Chernobyl, and also I want to talk about the experience we all had of being overcome with emotions when we revisit a special place associated with some precious memories so private to us. Now, although Chernobyl is in Ukraine, 70% of the radioactive fallout when the nuclear disaster happened actually fell on Belarus, the country next to Ukraine, contaminating a quarter of the country, liquidating a large number of rural settlements. This is my good friend Alex from Belarus. Like many Belarusians, he grew up in a beautiful village, but Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened in 1986, just destroyed their lives. To the left is a picture of him taken outside his mother's office. Alex and his family were forced to relocate to Ukraine and return to the same spot after over 20 years, as you can see in the photo to the right. Every time when I look at these photos, I always try to relate to him, imagining the kind of emotions he was going through standing there at the same spot. Now, no doubt we connect with old buildings emotionally, regardless of their utility or aesthetic distinction. But the question is it possible to reverse engineer that and to create new buildings or spaces with meaning, with human resonance? This is the challenge I set for myself. And I was experimenting with a very modest temporary exhibition we put up for the London Festival of Architecture back in 2016. Chernobyl received a lot of attention in recent years because of the highly successful TV series, but not so much back in 2016. We felt compelled to commemorate its 30th anniversary with a small exhibition. We didn't have much money, so we decided to spend all our money on one thing with maximum impact. And the concept was based on a real event. If you watch the TV series, you will know the Soviet government mobilized hundreds of coal miners working around the clock over a period of time to dig a 150 meters long tunnel to reach the bottom of the reactor to stabilize it. And obviously they were not warned by the government, and they were all exposed to intense radiation. It was believed that many of them died very young as a result. So we took this concept and built a 15, not quite 150, but 15 meters long tunnel using OSB boards, the cheapest material possible, with different heights. And the tunnel was getting darker and darker as you approach the exhibition. And eventually you couldn't take pictures because it was just complete darkness, to emulate the emotional state of the coal miners when they were digging the tunnel. And the visitors will experience a similar kind of atmosphere. And eventually the tunnel will let the visitors to a dimly lit room in which the story of Chernobyl was told. And the next project I would like to show you is the Belarusian Memorial Chapel built in London in 2017 in North London. It is an Eastern Catholic wooden church. It's Eastern Catholic. It's not the same as Roman Catholic. They basically observe the Orthodox liturgy, but they are in full communion with Rome. And it was built for the Belarusian diaspora community in the UK, and it happens to be the only wooden church in London. For the community, it has been a long time coming. The story actually began just after the Second World War, when many Belarusian soldiers fled the Soviet Union and relocated to the UK with their families. They were still haunted by the memory of the Second World War because Belarus lost a quarter of its population, the largest percentage of any country during the conflict. Everybody knew somebody who was killed. Everybody knew somebody was killed. And they were determined to preserve their identity in their new home. And they started to gather in this house called the Marian House in North London. And they established an Eastern Catholic Church inside, which they consider their national church. The community converted a small room into a temporary working church and worshipped inside for the next 70 years. And it had always been their collective desire to one day to build their own church. And they've even set up a boarding school and a library to teach their children their own Belarusian language. I'm sure if you ever move abroad, most of you would want to preserve that sense of identity, that connection with your culture, your motherland is very common to all humanity, really. And fast forward 40 years, obviously we know Chernobyl happened in 1986, devastating Belarus. And when I first got involved in the project, none of the designs I came up with was good enough because I really knew nothing about the country. And the community actually paid to send me to travel to Belarus to see the country firsthand. And I undertook an extensive field trip to Belarus, interviewing the victims of Chernobyl, like a journalist, really. I think it's good when you do a field trip, you approach the place like a journalist, because we can learn so much from journalists. No, don't think of yourself as an architect, because we have a very different way of thinking. But journalists are very good at uncovering the meanings underneath the surface of things. And I visited many of their historic sites, and I use drawing as a tool to recall my feelings and my understanding rather than photographs, because we tend to take tons of photographs without actually looking at them after we took the photographs. In my smartphone, I have thousands of photographs that I've never looked at. Taking photograph itself, is it really that meaningful? I don't know, but drawing them will give you a different kind of experience. You build a relationship with the subject you investigate through drawing. Now, this is an earliest example. I visited a 16th century fortified church found in northern Belarus. And before the Russian occupation in the late 18th century, most people in that region were Eastern Catholic. They were not Russian Orthodox. And the Baroque architecture of the time was strongly associated with their Catholic faith. And this 18th century Baroque church was typical of that time. This is a very weird looking, peculiar looking wooden church found in southern Belarus. And this is another wooden church preserved in an open air museum near Minsk, the capital of Belarus. This is another typical 18th century Baroque wooden church from the north, originally built as an Eastern Catholic church. And I discovered by chance that Eastern Catholic churches were not east facing when I was sketching this church. This is something, I picked up through drawing. If I just took a photo of this, I don't think I would notice that, because when I was drawing it, the sun was shining right into my face, and I realized the church was not even facing east. And I doubt I would notice that if I were just taking photographs of the church. And this church, like all other Eastern Catholic churches, were forcefully converted into a Russian Orthodox Church in the 19th century, because in 1839, the Eastern Catholic Church was officially banned, and the Russian Orthodox Church authorities started to modify Eastern Catholic churches, and they replaced their original Baroque cupola with the typical Russian onion domes here. So you will have this really interesting combination of essentially Baroque, Western Latin church building as a body, and then you have this Russian onion dome sitting on top, which is really, really interesting. And now these photographs are very, very precious. I found them in the Belarusian library. Belarus was once washed with distinctive wooden churches inspired by Baroque architecture, as you can see here. They have very distinctive features unique to the region. If you live in that area, you can immediately identify them from your part of the world. Now, such as the vertical cupolas and the the Baroque cupola and the vertical planks. These churches emphasize the walls, the body, unlike the wooden churches we saw in Central Europe, in Romania, in Slovakia, with their roofs coming down very low. They emphasize the roofs, but the churches in this part of the world, they emphasize the body. And this is a sketch showing the authentic Eastern Catholic crosses and Baroque cupolas. Now, inside these vernacular wooden churches is really cozy, really homely. You feel like, you feel domestic. And they were usually curated by the villagers and the priests. And I remember a Belarusian once told me that the best buildings are those when you enter, you don't think about the architect. And these wooden churches certainly have this quality. And I'm not trying to talk down architects, but I hope you understand what she meant. 40% of Belarus is covered by forest, and many structures in the past were built predominantly out of wood, but many of them were systematically destroyed during the 20th century by the Soviet state, by Chernobyl, and by the Nazi troops during the Second World War. And very often the Nazis would lock up all the villagers in their wooden churches or synagogues. And then they would set these wooden churches or synagogues on fire, killing everybody. Now, 3 million people lost their lives, including virtually the entire Jewish population from Belarus. Back in London, here is the site just behind the house, the Marian house I showed you early on. It's a very tight site, and it's surrounded by 17 protected trees rising up to 20 meters. These trees are all protected. We can't touch them. We can't fall them for very good reasons. And therefore, we have to carefully place the church so that it stays outside the tree root protection zone, resulting in a very modest building. And the building doesn't have to be east facing, as I've learned, so it makes the task easier. The floor plan is very simple and traditional. This is the point. The liturgy, the divine liturgy of the Eastern Catholic Church has not changed for 1,000 years. So the layout worked back then will still work nowadays. And we need to respect that. I think this is very important as architects. You have the porch to the left, and then you have the nave in the middle, and then the altar to the right. The church will be in the shadow of the house most of the time throughout the year. And that's why the front elevation is mostly glazed to maximize daylight penetration. Otherwise, it will be pitch dark inside. Now, these are the early sketches of the Baroque cupola topping the buildings. Functionally speaking, its round profile serves perfectly as an amplifier for the bell inside, as well as a ventilator. We can say what we like about the cupola, and I've heard many people criticizing it, calling it a pastiche or a copy of the past, or even a postmodern language. But but this is their identity. The Baroque cupola is an expression of their Eastern Catholic faith, and they've been banned for 200 years from publicly expressing their identity. And one has to really be sympathetic about it. And for the first time in 70 years, they have the chance to build their own church. The last thing I wanted to do was to deny them the opportunity to express themselves. I don't think any architectural ideology should really take priority over a community's right to express themselves. And you would very often find the wooden churches in Belarus nestled within the forest, and the facade was animated by the moving shadows of the tree branches, and it was really beautiful. And the design emphasized the walls and celebrates verticality, as we could see from those precedents. And the simple form is also very effective in terms of circulating air. And there is an air recovery unit hidden underneath the altar, blowing hot air into the space in winter. And the design of the grille was inspired by a national folk pattern. All the structural parts, including the cupola, were prefabricated in the workshop to minimize disturbance to the trees on site. And the front tower and the back wall were holding up the roof. They were made by a small team of British carpenters using British Douglas fir. You know, this is what a vernacular architecture is all about. Is a homemade building in the true sense of the word. And they built this in a workshop not very far from the site, actually. It's about 45 minutes by car. And the infills are cross-laminated timber panels made of radiata pine, which is a very fast-growing species, very sustainable. And we wanted a quick assembly of in order to protect the trees around. You could see from the video the building went up in almost no time. And we wanted to use a combination of traditional and engineered techniques, because we wanted to celebrate what we could do with our hands and with technology. And you can see these long, thin wooden nails, we call them pegs, is very, very English, actually. The fact that what we learned from the Belarusian presidents is not to copy their way of building, because in Belarus, they build these wooden churches differently. They build up the solid wall, on top of each other. But in Britain, in order to be true to that spirit, we want to use the English technique instead of Belarusian technique, because it's the essence that is important, not a very, not a direct copy of what we got from a different context. And we have to crane the panels above the top of the trees to get to the site in order to not to hurt the trees. And yes, where am I? And we completed the building in 2017, and these are the photographs. Again, some people might like the cupola, some people might not, but what is important is finally the community could express themselves. I think this is what's more important. And this undulating wavy wall, if you like, it feels like a drape, and it was inspired by the moving shadows in the forest. And it was done without the use of computer. It's a very simple trick. You cut the planks into two at different angles. We don't always have to use algorithm, or you could achieve amazing thing with our hands and our brain. And these photos are showing the interior, and this is the bell underneath the cupola. The cupola amplifies the sound of the bell. Is very effective, a bit too loud, but and the walls on both sides are not low bearing, and that's why they don't have to kiss the floor nor the roof. They could be kind of floating in between the floor and the roof, which is rather charming. And the Eastern Christian liturgy is all about, if you've ever observed a Eastern Christian liturgy, you will know it's all about stimulating the five senses, smell and touch and all that. They kiss their icons and all that. So the chapel, therefore, was meant to be tactile. From the very first moment when you encounter the building, you hold the door handle in your hand, you can feel the presence of wood. And even after 5 years, I went back recently, you can still smell the smell of wood inside. And this picture was taken during the opening, and it's unexpectedly become a much loved building by the community worldwide. And many people travel all the way from Belarus or from wherever to visit this building. The irony is that this project could only happen in a free society like the UK. Now, this photo was taken by English photographer Jim Stevenson early last year, early last year. And rather than an empty space, the community has injected its personality into the space. Now, as I said early on, spaces could only be given the most meaningful expressions, not by the architect, but by the lived experience of the occupants. And I really like that. And I think Architecture magazine probably would love to publish photographs like this. But for me, I would love to see them, changing the interior and to inject their personalities. And finally, on this project at night, whenever there's a evening service, it will glow like a beacon, referencing those burned wooden churches destroyed by the Nazis during the Second World War. So when the Belarusians are praying, they're also commemorating their ancestors who died in the war. It's a bit heavy, so I'll just quickly share 2 more projects and we're done. The next project is a vintage car gallery and workshop currently being built, and it should be finished next year, fingers crossed. And is a more cheerful story. Is a story about a very interesting English family-run business in England, and this family-run business is known to be the world's oldest independent specialist in vintage Rolls-Royce and Bentley. And it was founded in 1946 by the gentleman to the left called Frank Dale. He was buying and selling Rolls-Royce and Bentley just after the war in London, and he passed his business to his stepsons, and they passed it on and so on. And over 7 decades of development, now in its 4th generation, it's become an authority in the world of pre-war and post-war models of Rolls-Royce and Bentley. And they're so well respected and knowledgeable that even Rolls-Royce needed to contact them for advice on restoring their own model. And they have handled some of the most important examples built by the 2 brands. It's really rare to find a company like that nowadays. It's all about quick profit, how to go public quick. You have all these tech companies and all that. But this family business is all about passion and love, and they're very passionate about something of quality. In a way, in a really strange way, they're like the Belarusian diaspora community. They're totally dedicated to preserving a piece of memory, a dying art. And now the company is run by a brother and sister team. I remember when I first met them, Emma said at the beginning, "We're not married couple, we're brother and sister, don't get it wrong." And they're very progressive in their outlook because the business needs to move forward with time. And they care about the well-being of their staff, and they also want to attract new talents to join the rank. The building they occupied, which is this one, was not fit for the purpose for displaying the collection. As you can see from the photos, it's too overcrowded. really, these are works of art, but when you go in, you feel, you know, very, very catastrophic inside. And that's why they purchased a site in an industrial estate in Surrey, near London, and commissioned a new headquarters that would provide the staff with good working environment. This is the site they bought, which they also wanted an exemplar piece of industrial architecture that would enhance customer experience, allowing visitors to see how the vintage cars are built. And we've looked into the possibility of keeping the whole building, but unfortunately it's just not big enough. As you can see, the interior is not very well ventilated and not very well lit. It's just very similar to what they have right now. I mean, then what's the point of moving from a very overcrowded space to another overcrowded space? So we had to transform the building that will fulfill their very specific spatial requirements. And the easiest option is to build these, you know, typical steel clad, metal clad warehouses, but that's not what they wanted either. And although we had to take most of the building down, we tried to be eco-friendly, and we were trying to save the large existing concrete floor slab, and also the front building, which is this one here. We studied this existing building. Is one of those, you know, usual industrial buildings, but we took great interest in finding out more about this building, and we consulted some experts on this. And at first sight, it looks like later 1930s. It could be built in 1930s. It's too plain to be much earlier, but the simplicity, especially around the entrance, could argue for an immediately post-war date after 1945, when everything gets pared down, and for a little while there wasn't much premium on stylistic innovation. In a historic map last revised before 1930, illustrates, as you can see here, a building of the same shape on site as one of the first buildings in this estate. One could also argue the building could be built in the 1920s. We can never be certain, because there's no record of this kind of so-called ordinary buildings, or ordinary architecture, if you like. But the building could be one of the earliest modernist buildings in the UK if it was built in the 1920s. Although industrial architecture, a typology that architects, well, I mean, especially at the most modest end of the spectrum, is likely to be a little bit behind the curve stylistically. And this building seems to be more stripped down modernist in terms of style, with only very slight decorative emphasis of the pilasters. A little bit Art Deco looking, if you look at these two pilasters around the entrance. And no one's going to write a PhD dissertation on this building, but we were very interested in finding out more, because this always offers us some clues in terms of the design. And we use this as a starting point, and drew inspiration from the heritage of modernist, constructivist, as well as, you know, streamlined modern architecture. Even though they were very different, they were underpinned by totally different ideological aspirations. They actually borrow each other's visual attributes. If you pay attention to that, many constructivist Soviet architects migrated to the UK, and then they inspired the modernist movement there. And likewise, you know, Art Deco, streamlined, modern, even though they represent very different ideologies, and they kind of borrow each other's aesthetic. And a great example of this fusion is this Delaware pavilion built in 1935, a marriage between steel construction and streamlined modern architecture. You could also call it international style. When did it start? When did it stop? You know, a style when it is really a very, very gray area when you start to analyze the style of a building. And streamlined modern architecture was strongly associated with automobiles, cars, and transport. And we want the exterior of the building to resonate with the story of the company and its collection of cars. The shape and the dimensions of the new building we're going to build are determined by the movements of these larger than usual vintage cars. You know, we have to make sure they could get in and get out without much problem, and hence the round corner here to allow the car to get into the car lift and get back out and in reverse and get out or get into the working bay. And the new building will be their long-term home with a total internal floor area of about 4,000 square meters or 40,000 square feet. For those who love old cars, the collections are works of art. If you love cars, you will love their collection. They are art. It's not a garage. So we perceive the new building as more like an art gallery rather than a garage, and showcasing not just the finished cars, but also the process of restoring these works of art. And externally, the volume is expressed in two distinctive parts based on their functions. The polycarbonate cladding unites the workshop space to the back, providing lots of daylight and cross ventilation for the workers. We want the workers to have light and to have ventilation. And the offices and the showroom and the staff canteen will be located in the new front block with white render. When you enter the building, the visitors will see the showroom on the ground floor, and after that, they are presented with the opportunity to see the restoration process through an elevated walkway into this very deep and long workshop. In the end, this is artist's impression. When it's finished, it will look more like this. And I want to give more time for Professor Pina and everyone to ask questions. So I will just quickly wrap up with this last project. This is a project very, very close to my heart. And I won a competition back in 2018, and I really hope that one day we'll be able to materialize it. In 2019, the European Parliament passed a resolution to designate the 23rd of August as the European Day of Remembrance, commemorating all victims of the 20th century totalitarianism. It called for the creation of the first pan-European memorial for all victims of 20th century totalitarianism. And they later set up an NGO called the Platform of European Memory and Conscience, which organized an international design competition in 2017. And Jean Square, I'm sure I got it wrong, it's in French, but I don't know how to pronounce it, which is this dot here in central Brussels, was chosen as the site. It was named after the president of the former president of the European Commission. And the site was strategically chosen because of its proximity to all the EU buildings, as you can see here in the map. And but the problem is totalitarianism didn't take place specifically here. It was chosen politically. So unlike places like Auschwitz, the site doesn't really embody any memories of the atrocities. So my question was how to bring the memories to the site. For a long time, I was struggling to come up with a meaningful commentary. And in the end, I based the concept on a protagonist, an imaginary person, a messenger, who was carrying a suitcase full of letters written between the victims and their loved ones, and he collected all of them around Europe and came to the site, to the middle of the square, and then scattered the letters all over the square. And this was the concept. And the success of the scheme was wholly relying on the letters and the stories of the victims. We needed the real letters. My colleagues asked me to fabricate the letters. I said no, because no one can emulate those emotions embodied within those letters. The tone of voice, the handwriting and all that. Imagine if you were about to be executed tomorrow, you're writing your last letter to your mom. No one on this planet could fake that emotion. It's unique. Each of them is unique. We launched a campaign and unexpectedly received the permission to use up to 40,000 letters, enough to cover the entire square twice. And many of them were sent directly to us from the relatives of the victims with their blessings, and some of them even translated them into English for us to understand. And the stories told in the letters and their handwriting are so powerful that no commentary from any architects is needed to evoke an emotional response. We'll carefully select and enlarge the letters and have them printed on the pavings. The memorial is about the absence rather than the presence of a come and look at me type monument. It's very easy to miss because it's on the floor. If you don't look at it, you will miss it, but that's okay. We just hope that one day passers-by might notice one of the letters written in her own language and she would make an emotional connection with it. I think that's more than enough. You don't have to have a 10-story tall monument standing in the middle. And also, for that reason, the memorial is not about confrontation. It doesn't block the flow of the pedestrians. It doesn't confront pedestrians. It's all about healing. Do we have time? I mean, if we have time, I can share a very short extract from one of the letters I read. It is not long. It's only one paragraph. It's an extract. There are many of them, but I observed that most people, when they were about to die, they all chose to write to their mothers because mothers give lives. And there's this maternal love is one of my favorite topics, really. I mean, in my drawings and all that. I think maternal love is very unique, just uncomparable. Not this connection between mothers and children. If you look at Christianity, you have the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus and all that. It's just there's this special link between mothers and all of us, really. And so I just want to finish this presentation quickly by sharing with you this letter written by Valerio Bavazzano, written on the 16th of May in 1944 in the prison of Marazzi in Genova and in Italy. And it's a real shame because if he could hang on for another year, he would, the war would be over, but he couldn't make it. And he says here, "Dear Mama, a sad presentiment tells me that we met for the last time today. Dearest Mama, fate keeps on being cruel to you. This life of mine, that together we have content so many times to the death, finally manages to escape me. Please find comfort in the thought that I will be strong until the end." Whoa, it's a bit heavy. And certainly, I do not feel afraid. The only great thorn or great regret in my heart is knowing that Millie and you will be alone in this world. I think that's kind of sums up my presentation tonight. But thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Tszwai. You finished it in a very sad way. I mean, reading all these letters years after really makes us feel, really connects us to what happened in the history, and really makes us feel what they felt in that time. Unfortunately, this does not help. This does not help their pain at that time, but trying to understand them, trying to live what they lived is a way of also remembering them, is a way of understanding. So thank you very much for the presentation. I think all were very, very fine. As I have some questions to you, also the audience can ask questions. For the audience, please write your questions in the chat section of this Zoom program. But until you write, I want to start with my own questions. You're not the only one architect in the office, in the Spheron Architects. You have a partner. So would you please tell us more about how you work together? Because when I was listening to you, I just really concentrated on your feelings, your understanding of the world, your interpretation of things. But what happens when you start to work as two people sharing one business? I mean, I'm sure your partner has some other ways of understanding the world and interpreting the world as well. So how do you match them? How do you come to a conclusion in the end? I really wonder this, because emotion is something, flannery is also something very personal and can be interpreted in a very personal level. But how do you transfer it to an upper class so that you can share it with your partner, with the people who are going to build it, and with the people who are going to occupy it in the end? I mean, how does it happen?
It's a very good question. I think it will be easier to use project to answer that question. Now, for example, the church built for the Belarusian community in London, I think each project is a collaboration. It's not about my emotion or my business partner's emotion. It's about a community's emotion. I think our job is there to go underneath the surface and listen to their narratives and what they were trying to achieve. I think it is really fair to say that wooden church built for the Belarusians was designed by the Belarusians, and the memorial was designed by the victims, because we put I think it is a very, very, very good question. I think the point I'm trying to make is the design evolves very organically, and in each project, it was never well, sometimes we do have some very difficult clients, but of course I will never talk about that project. But the point I'm trying to make is, if I always said to my students, I said to them, don't get too hung up on one's own talent. It's my belief. I'm sure many architects wouldn't agree with me, but I said to my students, there are plenty of really, really talented architects out there, but only good clients could unlock their talents. But I think a beautiful project comes from a beautiful story. And I remember, funny you asked this question, I asked my business partner many years ago, I said, how can we do a business plan to attract clients with very meaningful, moving stories? And then my business partner said, you can't go after those projects. Those projects will come to you in an accidental way. You can't really plan for that. So what we're hoping for always is to wait for clients with a beautiful story, and then we can then work around that story and develop something together. And just to answer your question, I think for example, the Belarusian project, I think the community definitely didn't need to work with us. They could have worked with any architects in the world, and the result will still be more or less the same. Because if in a particular context, some design decision will naturally make more sense than the other. And then a good architect, regardless of who she is, she could be a Turkish architect or an architect from Finland, whatever, got involved in that project. The clients will lead them to, through investigation, lead them to the truth. And that's what I meant by thinking like a journalist. If you are a good journalist, for example, reporting about the war, you go to do investigative journalism, you really investigate. In the end, no matter who you are, you uncover the truth. So in relation to that context, does it make sense to you, Professor Pina?
Yes,
I think,
sure.
yeah.
Sure. Thank you. And what about drawing?
Yeah.
I want to connect to the drawing part.
Yeah.
I think very talented you are. I don't know how you got it. I mean, is it from your school, or you were doing it before your university education?
Well,
what's your relation to drawing, this gargoyle drawing?
I think, well, first of all, thank you very much for your compliments. And I think, well, I didn't really do well in school at university. I think I almost failed almost every subject, but I picked up this passion for drawing because it was not academic. I wasn't good in structure, wasn't good in history of architecture, wasn't even good in design. But then drawing, there's no right or wrong answer, right? You don't have to draw amazingly. You just need to pick up a pen or a pencil with a piece of paper, you can draw. And I picked up that habit when I was at university. And the other reason I picked it up was because I was terrible in taking photographs. And so when but I think drawing is very, it wasn't really that particularly unusual in my time. I remember I started my architecture education more than 20 years ago, late 90s, early noughties, and still around that time, the school put a lot of emphasis on drawing, and many architects in the past went on drawing tour. Drawing was I think it's we've come a long way. I think these days students tend to draw less through, and I did that religiously over many years. When I travel, I don't, well, I did take pictures. I'll be lying, I didn't take photographs at all, but I tend to force myself to do at least 3 or 4 sketches on a trip so that I could really sit down and see and feel the space. And I think it's not really about talent. When you do that so many times, and it becomes your second nature. And then at some point I realized actually drawing is not only a very good observational tool, you use that to observe, but also it's an art form. You could draw from imagination. You could communicate with your inner world visually, and with the viewers as well. I hope that answered your question.
So when you are observing your environment, or when you're observing a building, instead of taking a photograph, you just try to sketch it. You try to draw it.
Yeah.
But when you're drawing, what very special thing happens between you, the object, and you and the object? What's the relationship? I mean, what happens in between you, so that the photograph, very objective thing, cannot catch? What's the uniqueness of the drawing? Is that your selection of some points, or is that some emphasis you give to something, or is that you keep away something that a possible picture photograph can involve? What happens? What you do? It becomes very quickly, I suppose. It becomes very unconsciously, but afterwards, when you look at the things you draw, what do you feel that what you are doing when you are drawing? Analyze your drawing process to me, please.
I think it's a very, very good question. I don't know whether you remember, I show a drawing of medieval tower, very precise, and all that, and then the next slide showing two sketches of the same building, but they were only about an hour apart, and it changed. I think so at the well, in my formative years, when I first started picking up drawing as a habit, when I traveled, I just wanted to do that like a good student academically, just make sure I get the perspective right and the proportion and all that. So it's very, very academic, very mechanical. And then when you start doing that, you were facing a challenge in terms of the fact that the sun moves and the shadows either get bigger and bigger or whatever, and you can never really capture that precise moment when you're looking. When you first started doing a precise sketch from the beginning, by the time when you finish, even if you do a very simple quick one, it will be 45 minutes or 1 hour. 1 hour later, I don't know whether I should put back that sketch on the screen, but 1 hour later, it looks completely different than 1 hour ago, because of so I started to learn to focus more on the feelings. It's about catching that moment, really. It will last for when you go to a place. I don't know, throughout my lecture, I was talking about this emotional response from your mind in response to the buildings or spaces you visit. That feeling comes and goes in seconds. So I think in order to be I feel like recording the emotion at that particular moment is more important than getting all the perspective right and all that. And from that onward, I try to be loose about it. I don't really care about the proportion or perspective and all that. I just really want to capture that moment of feelings, and every single sketch is different because every time I have a different emotion. And drawing is essentially putting marks on a piece of paper. You're creating a visual illusion. Really, what you're looking at is not a house, it's not a building, it's just lots of lines. So drawing is also a language, in the sense that the lines, the strokes, the lines and all that are like words and vocabulary and grammar. When you say a sentence, you will try to make it grammatically correct, and you want to use the right verbs and adjectives and all that. And in drawing, it's the same. You have your vocabulary and you have your grammar, and it's a different way of communicating. And that's what I said early on. There's a limit to the language. We can only communicate so much within the limits of a language. And there's certain things you can't really communicate, and you have to do that differently. Music is another way of doing that, and drawing or art is another way of communicating the unsayable, things that you can't say. You are not able to. Does it make sense to you? So
yeah,
it's life. if you like, my observation on.
Yeah. So do you think that today students of architecture are really dealing with stylistic issues, are dealing with the digital world a lot, but forgetting about the essences of geography, the universe, maybe the material, maybe the sun and the shadow, maybe we should be dealing with more basics rather than dealing with lots of history, lots of theory, I mean, lots of knowledge. Instead of, is it possible that we can teach architecture in that way? Just being planners and trying to build up some relationships with the physical environment as we want. Can it be a teaching methodology, do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think what we can learn from psychogeography is to really try to resist the temptation of capitalism, in the sense that I think inevitably every capitalistic society would, in one way or the other, force people to think and do things a certain way, because what it does is it commodifies everything, including human relationships, you know. And it's a very deep question, Professor Pina. I don't think I will be able to answer it in without going on for another 5 hours. But I would encourage students to read philosopher Hannah Arendt's The Human Conditions. Is a very, very good book. It's really about being authentic, learning to live an authentic life. Being authentic doesn't mean being original. Being original means you're the first to do something crazy. You know, you're the first person who does that. It doesn't mean like that. You could do the same things. You and I could be having the same coffee in a coffee shop together. We're doing the same thing, but we're authentic. You know, but someone could be the first person who ever eats spaghetti with his nose. You know, this is original, but it's not authentic. It's just doing crazy things for doing crazy things' sake, and that there's a very there's a big difference between the two. And I totally agree with you. I think revisiting the basics and try to and also putting in time. This is really important. You know, doing a drawing would take substantially longer than taking a photograph. But usually if you invest time in doing something, the reward is far greater than, you know, quick fix or shortcuts. And I think one of the issues with digitalization is it makes it so easy to do many things, and nobody really wants to invest time in doing anything after all. If you look at although it's a moral thing, I can name so many examples in our daily lives. For example, romantic relationships. You know, for example, I think nowadays people tend to give up too easily. But if you look at the older generation, they will, if there's a problem, they will try to fix it. They will try to overcome it instead of giving it up. But
we consume everything.
Yeah, we consume everything. Yeah. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah. Okay. There's a question. There are also some addresses in the chat session. These addresses are the ones you gave to me, and so that we are transferring it to the audience. They're your videos, they're your buildings, and other material related with you. If they want to search more about you, they can have a look at it. And there's also a question to you. I'm going to read it. I appreciate that you bring out the emotion in the buildings with your sketches, and that you try to create a response to other people's feelings with your architecture, Nice to meet you. Greetings. It's from Professor Nazan Kırcı from
Very nice to meet you as
my
well.
department. Because it's very rare that people talk about emotions in architecture. We always talk about the styles, the tectonics, the materials, the technology, the artificial intelligence, the BIM technologies, and many other stuff. How did you come to the matter of emotions? How did it start? How did you discover it? With Anna Arendt or with some other things when you were looking for answers to your certain questions? I mean, how did you get rid of all that stuff that was put into your mind when you were doing your university education and you started to build up something on emotions?
Wow, it's a very good question, but I'm not sure if I have a very clear answer to that. I think it's being built up over time, and I think it's not like one single moment that you know changed my way of thinking. First of all, I wasn't, if I'm being totally honest, when as a kid growing up, I didn't know about architecture. I wasn't thinking about becoming an architect, but I was interested in watching films and reading books and all that. I think books or films that were exploring the theme of emotion always impressed me, and I don't know why. I think I enjoy watching films that would make me cry than watching films that would make me laugh, and I think it's just me really. And also I think we're living in a society, you know, whether you're in Turkey or in Africa or Asia or Europe. I don't know about other society. I haven't lived in many places, but I suppose globalization is really making everywhere the same pretty much, and I think we're so reluctant to really share our feelings. You know, we if you look at social media, you know, everybody is curating his or her lives, that you want to show the best to the people, and at the same time I think many people are suffering from mental illness when we know that. And I think it's really sad. I think it's because we put too much focus on making our life look better than it really is, and we don't really want to talk about emotions and all that. I think it's really, and also empathy is another thing. You know, when you come across, for example, the story of Belarus really deserved to be told worldwide. I mean, they've suffered a lot during the Second World War and Chernobyl and Soviet time and all that. Even to this day, I think you know, it is, empathy is really a very good quality to have, and I think by focusing on the emotional side of thing, it helps me to, if you like, become a slightly better person. Yeah, and I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, you started with your childhood, in fact. Normally we would expect an answer covering the your education in architecture, but you go back to your childhood and you try to connect it with what we have been facing or you're facing after you graduated from university, how you're doing the things and who you are doing it for. So it was interesting to hear that. Also, my last question is about the occupants. You said that, and you showed us that you enjoyed that some occupants touched your wood. construction. They hang their special objects on it. What happens if they do it too much, and they start to let me say harm your building or deteriorate some values of it? Would you still be appreciating?
If you asked me this question maybe 10 years ago, I would tell you I would be really upset. But but now you're asking me the question tonight, I'll tell you, I think it's about what is appropriate. If they really have I think it really depends on the reason why they do it, and I think if someone if it's agreed by the community, for example, if everybody from the community agrees to paint the whole building in black for very good reason, for example, then I wouldn't challenge that, because but on the other hand, if someone just I'm just joking really, if a crazy artist came along and say, well, I can do better and I'm gonna paint the whole interior in my image, then I don't think it's an appropriate way of altering the building. I think there's a fine line between the collective and the egos. If it's just really a matter of someone having a massive ego wants to alter the building in his own image, then I think it is really missing the point of the project. On the other hand, if the community collectively decides to make certain alterations because of its needs or whatever, then I'm all for it. I think architects shouldn't really feel too precious about their buildings. You know, at the end of the day, when if you're doing art in your own studio, you're free to do whatever you want. But if you're doing buildings, at the end of the day, it's really about the people, right? If the people can't really use it properly, then what's the point having you designing the building in the first place?
Yeah. Sometimes it happens in the studio. Even students make a model, and they don't want the teacher to make some operations on it. They don't like my touching it, even changing it. Everybody loves what they do, so they don't want it to be touched. They don't want it to be changed. But the community values, of course, that you're introducing this thing to us, it's very important. I think if it serves to community values, then it's very normal, and it's very good, positive that you just keep your ego lower, and you also become a part of this community as well. You are a designer. You're not another person, but you're also part of this community.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. And my message to students would be, ego, I don't really, I mean, I used to think, well, you have to have an ego to make something special, right? I used to think like that. I mean, artists and musician and
this is
all
what
that.
we are taught.
But when it comes to buildings for other people, that because people have to live in it and they have to live with it. You know, if you were an artist, you do a painting that nobody likes, then fine, you know, and you're not going to hurt anybody.
And before having deeper people, need of deeper people, I think we need more normal people. Before that, after that, we can go to deeper people. I want to go back to the film, and I want to repeat my question at the beginning. What made you make a film? Not a theater, not a show, not a video work, not a novel, but something cinematic, cinematographic. What is that? I mean, what raised it? What was your motivation?
It's a very good question. By the way, I'm not rejecting the idea of writing a drama or in the theater. One day you never know. I love different challenges, and but I think it's really unfortunate because I think the sound didn't come out nicely when the film was being watched on Zoom, because the background music and the images were very carefully matched, but I think it didn't come. I think we could
because
share
of the Zoom, I think.
Yeah.
It happened.
Yeah. But we can watch it another time.
Okay.
In a different way. But the film cinematography, the film is really about cinematography. I think it goes back to Herbert Wright said, before. I think he really believes architects and urban planners need to be cinematographers too, because cinematography is an art form, but it's an art form based on reality. Obviously, you can do different artificial lighting and all that. You can go to Photoshop and change the thing a little bit, but predominantly it's about capturing moments in life that are real. And when you study cinematography, and particularly getting involved in making a film, you understand urban planning or architecture could be like a film, and the other way around. I mean, without well, one could argue you could make a film about nature, you don't need any buildings, fine, but that's not the point. I think if you make a film set in the city, you have to have someone to build the buildings and spaces for you to make a film about cities, right? And also a professor from University of Cambridge, Professor Francois Pens, he's known for studying. He's a professor in architecture, but he's known for studying many films, because for him, films are very good records of they're like post-occupancy survey, because in films usually you wouldn't well, very rarely in I'm talking about films that most people will watch, not the films made specifically for the architecture audience. Usually you will look at films and look at spaces and buildings filled with lives, filled with people, and a lot of the time, if you look at well, quite often if you read architectural magazines, I think it's getting better in recent years, but back in the days, there's always an empty space with beautiful lights, and then there's no one, or everything is engineered. But actually, this is not really architecture is all about. Architecture only happens when people start to occupy the space and they start to leave their marks in the space. This is, for me, this is when architecture happens. So I think making a film teaches us just that as architects and urban designers. I mean, it's not an intentional misjudgment, but quite often architects or urban planners will think their job is over when you hand over the building. Oh, finished, take some nice photographs, and then
in fact it starts at that time.
exactly. I think making this film really taught me just that.
Okay, I understand you very well, because my specialization in academy is post-occupancy evaluation and architectural programming. I know the value of programming beforehand, but also building is open to a lot of interpretations, lot of different touches, a lot of different responses, and most of them are really irrelevant of the very different to the original aims of the building. And we should keep this in mind too when we are creating something.
Yes.
Okay, Tszwai, it was very nice to meet you again after 2019's World Architecture Festival in Amsterdam. And I was following you. Thank you very much keeping in touch with me. I was following what you were doing, and the more I've read about you and the more I've read about emotions, and the more I've understood how you were behaving towards the emotions and working with them, I really felt that I had to introduce you to my students. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation immediately as I asked it. And thank you very much for being with us this evening. Hope you enjoyed it as well.
No, I enjoyed
Maybe
it.
my questions were very pushing or very hard, but
it
was a very fulfilling interview for me.
No, they're very good questions, and thanks for having me here. And yeah, I would love to come to Turkey one day, and hopefully I can meet you and your colleagues and your students in person one day.
Sure, maybe you do some of the drawings in my studio, and people watch you, people understand you, how you are building relationship with the intimate environment, how quickly you are doing it, the style you developed as you were practicing this drawing. This would be very, very teaching for my students as well.
I'd love to do that. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
Yes, why not? We can organize a workshop and invite you. Why not? This is what all these meetings are for. We just introduce ourselves to each other. We try to understand each other. And then we start sharing something. We start collaborating with each other. So why not doing some more things, looking for some more collaborations. So absolutely. Thank you very much again. Hope hosting you in Turkey as well, in our studio as well. If not possible, via Zoom as well. In every aspect, you're welcome.
And maybe see you in Lisbon this year at World Architecture
I will be
Festival.
there.
Oh well, then I will see you. I will see you again.
I will be there. Yes, I will. I'm planning to be there. Okay.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay then.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Bye. Bye.